in the den of iniquity. Vicinity no pretty, calamity fi hit we any moment. What a pity. Tomorrow never certain. What dwells behind the curtain? The face of evil lurking with that shifty eyes averting. It's not a steady bubble that either pop or topple. Many will fall and stumble. Let the dozers gather rubble. From LA to Colorado, Guinea to Burkina Faso. Cannons could reach the towers and the troops will storm the castle. I say, run, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. I say, run, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. With the rubble steady rising, and hearts are compromising. Convictions here are stifling, making evil appetizing. The fists are steady forming, and countenance is falling. Defenses are withdrawing, possibilities are falling. In these your circumstances, evil will make advances. Pick up your sword and lances, and be sure to take your stances. Victory is never promised, the battle is upon us. Gather the brave and honest, and the righteous in your corners.
The battle is upon us indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Today we're going to be covering a book called Raw Deal, mainly about Jones veganism and activism in that regard.
I don't know about activism.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, as you come in, please go ahead and click that like button, click that share button, share the stream, answer the poll, participate. We're talking about the meat industry. Okay, the big meat industry, big agro. We know about big pharma. What is it called in agriculture? Big ag, big meat. Who knows?
No idea.
Okay. So the idea, generally speaking, is you have these industrial scale farming in this case, and it is pitted against typically more local, decentralized, mom and pop, what some people like to call sustainable. You get the idea. People like you going to farmers markets in Santa Monica and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's the idea that, this big agriculture is always, doing something bad to these little guys, Amazon or Walmart taking away mom and pop stores. So that general story is always there. But in addition to that, there is the meat is bad for you, meat kills you. And, meat is bad for the animals, obviously being, captured, and it's barbaric. I know before we get to this book here written by a Forbes writer, a journalist at Forbes, we're going to review a video of hers. But I know you're somewhat of a vegan, or used to be, or something like that, right?
I mean, I would say maybe like 85 to 90% of the time it's plant-based, but I do have dairy from time to time. I do have fish from time to time. That's something like I recently reintroduced into my diet again, like maybe 3 years ago. So just, I just eat what feels, I don't know, like whatever I crave. I've been vegetarian, if you want to put me in a label. Like I've been vegetarian for, I don't know, like 6 years or so now. And it was mainly because of like health reasons. I just wanted to try it and see if I feel any different. I mean, for the most part, I feel good. I just have a hard time going back to eating meat at this point because I just don't crave it right now. But I mean, I'll have fish and stuff once in a while. So I guess pescatarian, if you want to call me that. But that's where I'm at right now. So I'm not like against eating meat. I just personally just can't bring myself to eat meat at this point in my life. I don't know, maybe someday, knowing that, I knew where it came from. But for the most part, like we don't really know where our food comes from. So I just play it safe and eat plants.
Got it. You play it safe, eat plants. You do also what feels right to your body and what works for you. Okay, so let's go ahead and play a little. We're going to just be playing the clips here. Well, not clips, or, just stopping and starting this full interview. See what she has to say. What is her critique about, the meat industry?
And just, it's kind of a complete dichotomy of what was happening on the industry, financial, business, the vast majority of what we eat.
I just started all the way from the beginning. Shout out to C-SPAN, their
Now, on Book
use.
TV's author interview program Afterwards, Forbes magazine's Chloe Sorvino reports on the future of the U.S. meat industry. She's interviewed by former George W. Bush administration Agriculture Secretary Ann Veneman. Afterwards is a weekly interview program with relevant guest hosts interviewing top nonfiction authors about their latest work.
It is such a pleasure to be here today with you, Chloe. I read your book. It is most interesting and informative. But I thought we might start today with, just why don't you tell us why you decided to write this particular book?
The big question, yeah. So I've been at Forbes for 9 years now. I have agricultural coverage, and I started out way back when on the Billionaires Beat, getting to know a lot of the billionaires, particularly in the meat industry, that control the vast majority of what we eat today, what meat is consumed in America. And so, when the pandemic hit, I was very deep in reporting on everything that was going on, the financial implications, the health implications, humanity implications, and started realizing that I was probably one of the only people, if not the only person, that a lot of these billionaires were talking to. And I was hearing crazy things. One quote that's in the book that I'll never forget was, a meat millionaire saying, if it's raining gold, we're walking around with buckets. And there was this attitude towards profiteering that I was blown away by. And then at the same time, I was also doing so much reporting on climate change and, the next pandemic and how it could be on, a factory farm already. And there was just a lot of threats. And then just, this kind of complete dichotomy of what was happening in the industry.
Any thoughts so far? Anything stand out to you about what she has said as to why she wrote the book?
The big question. Okay. Climate change. It's always about climate change. Yeah. That's like the biggest thing now. Like before it used to be like animal rights. Now it's all about climate change. And we can get into it more, but I have been watching a bunch of documentaries about ranchers, and it's not like the meat industry isn't all like what everybody makes it out to be that has to do with like climate change. So yeah.
Gotcha. So it's not all about the horrible treatment. It's not all about factory farming,
right.
living conditions and stuff like that.
No, like what we see along the 5 North Freeway, that's like the later stage of the cows. Like that's the last stage before they get slaughtered. Like before that, like all of them are grass fed. They're like, it's like, as far as like what I understood from the documentary, like all cows start out grass fed. And then that's the last stage where they fill them up with like corn and all that, just try to get them as fat as possible before they slaughter them and sell the meat. But they all start out on ranches. They all start out, grazing, the fields and all that. I mean, I don't know, but that's just what I know from the documentary I watch. I don't know if all cows are treated that way, but most certainly not all of them are, just straight to a factory farm.
Got it. Now, she mentioned billionaires a couple of times. It seems like she uses that word as a pejorative.
Oh yeah, that's a trigger. That's the trigger word, billionaires. Yeah, they're the bad guys. I like how she's just like, they're talking to me. I feel like they're only talking to me. Like, oh, they're so special.
She's sitting there talking with the billionaires and they're making profits. Like there's an attitude of like profiteering, and typically it comes with the territory, right? So the profiteering attitude, I guess neither of us has an issue with that. You're an entrepreneur. So you don't mind that somebody's making money in their business.
No, of course not.
And then the aspect of maltreatment of the animals, you already kind of help us clarify. We will get deeper, I believe, into this global warming thing because I've heard about it too. It's about the way the cattle is raised. In other words, generally environmental issues about the amount of water that is used and all that, right? So let's see. Let's continue here.
Financial, business side of things. And I thought, I might be one of the only people who could really put these two worlds together. And I just really wanted to do it because climate change is getting worse. We have so little time to redo and completely overhaul the meat industry and change production to a place where we could have healthy, sustainable, localized communities, around these systems of production. And the climate clock is really ticking. We have to figure this out now. It's not years off in the future. We can't test pilot our way into the future. It's, the next few years. It has to be significant.
Running out of time.
Yeah, the running out of time thing, they always lose. You lose credibility when you do that. But I guess, when you're preaching, if it's a preaching to the choir scenario, it doesn't matter because you don't really need that kind of credibility. But if you're like Al Gore and you predicted that by 2010 we'll all be underwater and stuff like that, then when it doesn't happen, it's kind of like, okay, what's going on? Plus, a lot of the we run out of time people tend not to actually focus on the innovations that are actually happening behind the scenes, by people whom also want to become billionaires by solving the problem that you're talking about, right? So
Mhm.
it's always in a capitalist system and the entrepreneurial incentive to try to solve the problem by creating the next, solving that protein in a vat problem, right? We already know how to do it, but perfecting the process of using enzymes and programming, or basically biochemistry, to create viable meat alternatives, right? That will free things up and will not have all these problems anymore. But the idea on the side of people that seem to just say we run out of time, we run out of time, they're always talking about stopping something as opposed to looking at what is starting and will replace the thing already, perhaps. I don't know. You were the one that had the reaction about her time stuff. I don't know. What do you have to say?
I mean, okay, running out of time. So what's exactly happening? I would love to hear like what's happening right now that's so scary that we're running out of time. I mean, I don't know. I mean, climate change, yeah, it happens. I remember, was it like a year or two ago when everyone was saying, "Oh, global warming, it's so hot," and then like all of a sudden that summer, the next 2 summers were like the coolest summers I experienced, and like then all of a sudden they changed the narrative to like climate change because now they can't push this whole like global warming shit.
Well, that is true. That is true. Well, let her continue. She might make her case.
Change. There's already irreversible damage done. And so, I just really was driven by this need to get this story out and share that this, massive overhaul has to happen immediately. And it has to come from all levels of the supply chain, from workers to consumers to retailers, distributors, farmers, everyone in between, everyone who touches that piece of meat. Because right now we're cratering towards this incredibly food insecure future.
Well, that's a fairly grim assessment of where we're going, but it's a call to action as well. And so let's go back and address for a minute the fact that the pandemic, I remember during the pandemic reading all of these stories about how, workers were getting sick. They didn't have enough personal protective material or equipment to really be safe in the workplace, but it was considered an essential workplace. So I just thought it was a very scary time for those working there, but also they could pivot away from the concentration.
We're gonna move past or try to sift past that particular part there where they're complaining about worker conditions and stuff like that and how things are bad or whatever. And I think at this point here, the 30-minute mark and on, she starts to go back to the whole environmental aspect of things. Okay, but let's see.
Of sort of power in the industry. You had a chapter which you entitled "The Human Cost of Eating Meat." And when I first saw that title, I thought, oh, well, that's going to be, talk about the healthy nutrition factor, but it wasn't. That was about how you say that the meatpacking is one of the most dangerous jobs in America. And it's also a place you describe a lot of situations where, harassment and violence often goes unaddressed. And you also talk about the salaries are so low in some cases that these, workers are on SNAP, or what we now call SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which used to be called food stamps. So talk about this chapter about the human cost of eating meat.
Well, let's continue anyways, because it seems like, no, they are still kind of deep getting into the industry and poking at the industry as opposed to necessarily talking about the means and methods or and the environmental stuff, right? I typically find that kind of strange sometimes, because you can look into any industry and be like, hey, people are broke, money's not enough.
Yep.
That's true
everywhere, like clothing industry, like the clothing industry too,
Exactly. The restaurant industry, everywhere, right?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think overall, the bottom line is that big meat packers are perpetuating poverty among their workers often, and they're also perpetuating or, letting violence and harassment and sometimes even discrimination go unaddressed in their plants. And there are so many different ways that workers are impacted by the kind of negligence of, how this industry has grown over time. And I talk about several different specific lawsuits and different cases. Of one's a case of harassment and discrimination on religious grounds. Another is class actions featuring racial discrimination of some horrific examples. But there's also a situation of workers financially, and to your point too about just the actual health risks of working in these plants. I mean, it's no joke. I get so many alerts just every other week about different major injuries that are happening in plants that should not be. These are caustic environments, these are dangerous environments, and they're often a lot of times based on these injury reports that I'm seeing. You know, they're often examples when the plant hasn't had right maintenance or hasn't been doing enough to protect their workers, which is so serious. And it's why people were so worried about what was happening in the pandemic, because there's this history, and there's been this history for so long. But, you know, there's so many different ways that I uncover even that workers are being hurt by the system that even really haven't gotten some of the big headlines. And probably the most surprising one to me was just the kind of internal threat from antibiotic resistance that's prevalent in plants. Essentially, workers in these plants are more around superbugs, and sometimes those superbugs never leave the plant, so sometimes they spread, and workers are far more likely to contract a superbug. And while sometimes they'll never know it, sometimes what happens is that superbug lives in their gut, and it's only ignited when there's a certain piece of inflammation or a virus or a disease like pneumonia that they get. And so sometimes deaths from a pneumonia or something else can happen super quickly because...
How convincing is she? Go ahead.
This is just going off on a rant, man. Like,
sometimes.
Yeah, I watched like other parts of. I mean, I watched the earlier parts of this video, and she repeats the same words over and over, the same big words. You know, like when you keep repeating stuff, people will believe you, right? But it was just, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Let's get to the point here.
Yeah, and in terms of like the case, let's say for the workers, right? If I were trying to steelman the case to try to understand what is the truth behind what she's saying, right? To put a real face behind it, to put reality to it. Now, work conditions and whether they may be suitable or unsuitable for health and well-being of the workers, has always been it's an actual thing, right? So back in the 20s, before, you know, back in the day, there were certain people that would call themselves the progressives that wrote, journalists that is, that wrote about these factories where, you know, people are, you know, making pins and it burns down, everybody dies, no escape routes, those kinds of things. Before we started having all the things that made us have these laws, right? About it must be this and that and egress and all that kind of stuff, working condition laws. But it would seem like, okay, maybe in the meat industry, maybe they're just particularly backwards, right? And if that's the case, well, let's look into that. However, I doubt it. And I think that it's just a case where it's like, okay, this is a particularly dangerous job, like, you know, felling trees, or maybe even being someone that works at the garbage dump or something, or agriculture in general, or mechanized agriculture or something like that. Or a lot of factory work or working at a warehouse is a dangerous job. And if we're to show you the stats on that, it'll look bad too, right? And then moving forward, she does a lot of sometimes something may happen and sometimes something may happen. It's like, yeah, sometimes you know, a bug does get in your gut.
I mean, you know, I mean, my younger brother worked at FedEx when he was young, like when he was like out of college, and he was like a package handler. I mean, even like working at FedEx could be a dangerous job because he accidentally
it's a good union job too. Actually, but go ahead.
But he accidentally stuck his finger in some kind of like I don't know, what do you call those things? But like, yeah, I mean, he cut like the top of his finger. It's like sometimes that happens. Unfortunately, it happened to him. But like any kind of factory where it's like, you know, like assembly line type of jobs, like they're all dangerous. Like there's always a risk in like those types of jobs. I mean, and you just gotta, I don't know, be careful, or like have people that actually supervise a little bit better, like those types of workplaces. I don't know. I don't know enough, so I can't really say, but I would just
I
say,
worked
like,
at UPS doing the same thing. Well, wasn't FedEx, but I kind of knew about FedEx. And this was, and I think they were kind of generally in the same area out there by in the Ontario airport side there, right? Over there on Europa. But so I know about that job, and he probably put his hand on a conveyor belt or something like that.
Exactly. That's the word I was looking for.
So okay, that makes sense. Now let's see. Because part of the thing that's going on here is if you're talking about a sales job, or in other words, her ability to market her ideas, and she may be a good journalist, maybe she's a good writer, right? Which I kind of doubt too, because it's all about expression, and she seems to be harping on. She seems to be the kind of person that pushes emotional buttons,
Oh
And
yeah, I mean, she threw
yeah, only
racism in there,
yeah, it's like, racism, sexual assault, battery. Like, what else can we like? Just let's just everything bad is going on in
Mhm.
these meat plants. That that's like, okay, well, in orders of magnitude more than anywhere else, or what exactly is going on, right? But
Mhm.
anyways, let's see. I think I my bad.
I don't think she wrote anything offensive. They were just like
Yeah, no,
questions to
it was a
ask.
it was an error.
Oh yeah, he's a
Uh,
little bit blind, y'all.
shout out to Latasha. I was trying to do something else. But anyways, let her continue here. Let's see what we can unearth. And I'm trying to take seriously some of the aspects of what she's talking about, because I do not know if, in fact, working conditions for workers in the meat industry are particularly backwards. I don't know that. I doubt it, but
It's actually being ignited by a superbug, and there's all this new crazy research out there around how these long-term hidden risks to workers exist, particularly from the threat from superbugs and the long-term threat, not just a short-term threat. It's really that it could exist in them and cause death years to decades after they leave a job, even if they worked a job for like a summer, for example.
Yeah, it's I think I was really kind of shocked to read some of your descriptions of some of these issues, not just the short term issues, but these longer term impacts that you talked about, because I had not been previously aware of that. You also had an entire chapter on antibiotic resistance and the fact that the antibiotics that are given to livestock often have impacts on human health, and this has been.
Before we get into this, now for this area, I believe I would suspect that you're going to be more on the side of there are issues with this, right? In terms
like
of
putting antibiotics in food.
Yeah, and let me be careful here in the sense that I know I don't want to be one of these people that just hears something and then gets triggered, like, okay, antibiotics. Oh, it's antibiotics. They're pumping it in there. It's this weird thing. It smells funny, and gonna do bad things to everybody. So I don't necessarily want to do that. Or somebody just says, "Oh, GMO is bad." It's like, well, dogs are GMO and corn is GMO. Like, these things would not even exist if it was not for humans genetically manipulating it, and many other kinds of things like that. However, I do know that when it comes to food, right, that some things that may be, that shall we say, okay for you are not necessarily good for you to ingest.
Right.
And even when people know of these things, they may still go ahead and do it. But I think that antibiotics is probably in one of those kind of categories where it's like, people don't really understand it. Like, for example, you may know that sugar is bad for you, but you just go ahead and, people still eat it anyways. But this may be like one of those sugar things where it's okay to be in your food. There's nothing wrong with sugar. There's nothing wrong with that antibiotics. But maybe there should be more education around it, is my first thought. I don't know. What do you think about the whole, or let's let her make her case first before you.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't know enough about how antibiotics work in meat, so I can't really say. And I'd like to know, like, what does it really do for it? I mean, it sounds weird, like it sounds unnatural to put antibiotics in meat, So, like, why did they do that?
Well,
And, like,
the sense is basic, to kill the bad stuff you don't want in there, right?
right,
Okay.
right,
And
yeah,
we all know about bad stuff that grows, so we all know that we don't want it. We don't want it to grow, and we take antibiotics when bad stuff starts growing in us too, right? So
right,
we get that. One issue is becoming resistant to antibiotics, because basically, when you take it, the bad guys learn. The bad guys that are growing, they learn, they adapt. Then all of a sudden, that particular antibiotic is not effective anymore. So one idea is, hey, if we're taking all these antibiotics all the time, then we are actually developing a certain kind of. It's more like, okay, then if a pandemic hits, then we don't have enough kind of immunity, blah blah blah. That's one place that it typically goes. But let's see if there really is an issue other than that, because it's like one of those things where it's like, okay, if it's actually poison, no one is actually. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, there's different kinds of antibiotics too.
People
So,
in both the agriculture
as far as I know, like,
industry
I
and
mean, like,
public
my
health officials
husband is
have been talking
allergic
about
to a
for some
certain
time.
type of antibiotics. So it's like kind of just comes down to like, okay, what kind of antibiotics are they using? Because I mean, not every human is tolerable with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That
to
means
us a little bit
anything.
about this whole issue of the antibiotics in the meat food chain.
Yeah, I think aside from what I just talked about with workers, there's two kind of main levels which are deeply concerning about antibiotic resistance and the continued spread of antibiotic resistance. And just to take a step back, livestock are often given antibiotics to promote growth and for quicker, faster, more efficient growth, which is why there's been a lot of regulations to try to curtail sales particularly for growth, although there's been a bad data out there, and what is out there shows that, a lot of this change has plateaued, if not completely almost reversed itself. And so that's a problem because the threat of antibiotic resistance is probably one of the gravest threats to public health we face, especially as the globe gets hotter. Climate change makes antibiotic resistance worse because it's more hot, and that
Bam! Climate change makes everything worse. I don't mean to make fun of her, but she seems to just want to say certain things. Like it's just like I can't help but say, "Oh, look," especially when the world starts getting hotter. Yeah. I see where she's going. More kind of bacterial types of diseases, like the kind of things that you worry about in the tropics, right? It's like you go to the Philippines, you got to make sure you take, you got to watch out for more bugs because in the tropics, in hot swamp, wet places, things grow. Okay, sure. Okay, let's see.
of antibiotic resistance is probably one of the gravest threats to public health we face, especially as the globe gets hotter. Climate change makes antibiotic resistance worse because it's more hot, and that increases the spread, essentially. And there are a lot of scientists that predict we will hit a point where antibiotics are completely unable to be used. And aside from that, you also have the threat of the next pandemic starting on an industrial, confined livestock operation, just because of the way that those operations use and overuse antibiotics and how it's spread within the system. And so there's that threat, which can't be understated. But then there's also the problem I talk about in the book there's an emerging validation problem with what's actually antibiotic free and sold on the market. And so, there are a lot of people that are upset about the spread of antibiotic resistance and want to do something about it. One of the clearest ways to do it is to have consumers pushing for less antibiotics used in meat. And, this capitalistic system loves when we show that with our dollars. And so antibiotic free meat has been growing over years. But the problem is there's seemingly a supply mismatch with demand, and there's no validation. The USDA essentially will get like an affidavit from a company, not much more that happens from there, no verification, no actual testing. There's, I think, less than 1% of overall meat is tested. It's a tiny, tiny fraction. And you're now having lawsuits coming out, class actions, and different watchdog groups coming out and saying, this meat I bought at Whole Foods that says it's antibiotic free actually tests positive for antibiotics. And that just creates a whole host of questions and concerns because there needs to be a validation. There needs to be a way to ensure that these animals aren't actually being treated with antibiotics. And obviously, when an animal gets sick, they need to get antibiotics. I'm not saying that there should be no antibiotics use at all.
And what are these trace amounts of antibiotics that because you got, whenever you're measuring for something, right? You always got to tell me like the concentrations and the trace and stuff like that, because you can drink arsenic if the concentrations are low enough in parts per million or whatever, right? So
But there needs to be a clear way to have transparency and accountability, and it's as simple as that.
Yeah, I do think this is an issue that many have talked about for some time, and there's been a lot of concern about it. Now, I want to, now you've talked throughout this conversation about the impact on climate change of the livestock industry.
Let's get in there.
And you have a chapter entitled How Climate Change Will Upend Industrial Meat. And, you also talk about the importance of soil health. And, there is the whole question of how does the food system become more sustainable, and particularly the livestock industry.
Yeah, I mean, on a fundamental level, meat has to change. There needs to be less produced overall. And there also needs to be, the systems of production needs to completely change. And so, the systems of confinement need to end. I would like to see more meat produced in systems of adaptive multi-paddock grazing, where soil health is a priority.
And okay, well, let her continue, because she's talking about systems of confinement and stuff like that. You did mention that things are not as bad. People think that everything is just kind of like, people think that everything looks like a slaughterhouse.
Right.
But a slaughterhouse is just the end of the road. It's
Right.
not the whole life of the cattle in this case. Exactly. And some industries are worse than others. Like, for example, poultry may be worse than, poultry may be worse than, so, I mean, if you're going to eat something, but okay, so you mentioned that, generally vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, whatever, that kind of a thing. How about, you say you would not bring yourself to eat meat. You have nothing against, let's say, hunting, for example. Do you?
I mean, if you're gonna eat it, if it's for survival, like I get that. I mean, if it's for game, I don't know. I feel kind of bad for the
Well,
animal.
let's not go to the game. We're talking about food here, okay? Like,
Right,
let's not go
right.
to just because most people hunt deer, they want to eat it because they like,
Yeah, yeah.
venison or whatever.
I mean, if
So,
you need to eat
would
it,
you
yeah.
eat if I brought you some fresh kilt, you know, deer heart casserole?
Deer heart? No, I couldn't. No, like all the intestines and like organ stuff. No, can't do that.
You
I
don't
don't
like
know.
organ?
It's
Okay.
kind of. I think I need to like take my time to like figure out when I would even try it again, right? Like, because I haven't done it in so long, and I just don't crave it. And of course, like, I mean, this sounds lame, but like, I love animals, like, I think cows are cute. I think pigs are cute. Like, I would love to just have them as pets, but that's just me. So I just have a hard time bringing myself to like eat them, because yeah, I mean, I like animals, but I understand that they are part of human survival. Like, I'm not against people wanting to eat meat. It's just my thing with eating meats, like just knowing where it comes from, and just being aware of like what
Mhm.
like how they're treated and all that stuff. I mean, I mean, I don't have anything against it in general. It's just more like, for me, it's just I can't bring myself to do it at this point in my life. I mean,
And that's fine. And you don't have one doesn't have to, like force you to do certain things that you don't find morally reprehensible, but just aesthetically unpleasing, right? Like one doesn't have to force you to do that. It's like, So I think generally speaking, it's a kind of like a philosophical prediction. I heard somebody say it, and I believe it. Just given the direction that the world tends to go in, and the world has been going in, the trend is we're gonna get to a particular point where we're gonna have some kind of bill of rights for a select group of animals that we want to bring into the club, right? Now we'll probably never get there for flies, right? You can imagine, like, if there's a continuum. Right now we got bill of rights for for men, and then women and black people. And, we added, we kind of added people to the group slowly. At some point, I believe maybe like dogs or something like that. Probably in the next 70 years, we're going to start recognizing them in a particular way. It's just a particular direction. If you look at science, and this is not a moral, I'm not saying that they're going to be better off morally and we are worse off now. It's just, it just is what it is, right?
mhm.
If you look at the way we look at in terms of neurochemistry, and we constantly talking about the brain waves and brain patterns and stuff like that, when we start recognizing consciousness more with higher resolution, we're going to start seeing not only just their cute faces, but certain patterns in their consciousness that we kind of recognize that, oh my God, they do recognize the whatever, right? And that's just going to add more and more to the case. So there's going to be a science case being built, and if we continue to be economically prosperous, in other words, as long as there's the third world problems aspect, right? As long as you stay comfortable, then these are the things you think about, right? If we all go back to the Stone Age, no animal rights, okay?
Yeah, no, I'm not gonna think about
So,
how cute that cow is.
no one gives a crap about cuteness and any of that. So if we stay at a particular level on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, relatively economically prosperous, next 70 years, with the science moving in a particular direction that kind of adds to the whole pan consciousness, pan psychism, every other thing there is alive, and this, that, and the other. That'll add to the whole kind of drum roll, and I think that's where society is going, right? And it's just a fact. It's not a question of whether it should go there or whether it's good to go or better or anything. It's just how people are going to be, and obviously you're still going to have the meat eaters somewhere in a colony in an island somewhere, doing their thing, right?
It's gonna be like
Uh,
prohibition. You gotta go underground to get
yeah,
meat.
it's just like people are like, yeah, I got that meat,
Priority where biodiversity is a priority. There are several, companies and different systems I'm talking about in the book that are making that happen. But, the corn and soy and the feed that goes into these animals alone makes it extremely unsustainable. And it doesn't need to be that way. Livestock, they didn't always need to consume that type of food, but also as much as they currently do. That's number one. Number two, though, climate change and a warming planet actually makes those crops less nutritious, let alone it's going to make those crops have far more failures and not meet the production goal.
Part of an argument she's making here is that climate change is going to destroy the meat industry in the sense of, but she didn't quite make the argument of how the meat industry is contributing to climate change.
Right. Yeah,
But
I'm
she's
waiting
saying
to
that-
hear that, because then, we can have
Yeah,
a discussion about that.
Yeah, we might see, because that's the big marketing tool here, is that climate change, right? Hey, meat industry, climate change is somehow related, they're bad, that kind of a thing. However, in terms of the opportunities, again, because I'll find a video clip, right? Because on the other end of things, the entrepreneurial end of things, the end of things where people are not just journalists and writing stuff, where people are in labs, or maybe in universities, right? University labs and stuff like that, or billionaires funding certain biochemical research. There is, being developed, you are developing our ability to, again, take enzymes and create proteins. You see, it's interesting. There are these things called organic compounds. One of them is proteins, right?
Mhm.
Fats, right? We know those, right? The butters and the oils and the creamy stuff, right? Whatever. Fats, carbohydrates, we get that. We know those, like the sugars and the blah, blah, blahs, right? Proteins, that's a third one. And then there's another one called nucleic acids. That's the stuff, DNA is made of, okay? These compounds, can only come from living things. Like, they're made with carbon, right? We all know carbon chemistry, organic chemistry, that carbon is kind of what does the living thing stuff. And proteins are these long, complex chains. The reasons why they're you can't just get them anywhere is because they're rather long and complex things. Like, if you think of water as H2O, it's like, okay, not that very complex. But when you start talking about proteins, it's this crazy long chain, a chain of amino acids, and only the universe has evolved such that organisms make that stuff. We don't know how to make that stuff. We can't just create proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, and that kind of stuff. But there is a way of getting there, step by step. As we learn, we code the genome, we understand amino acids, we figure out ways of using enzymes to create these particular chains that are stable enough, blah, blah, blah. Someone is going to solve that problem. There's a video where someone in China is doing something in that regard, where, we're going to be making, now just forget just food. Okay. We're talking about like, cloth and all kinds of organic stuff. Right. And part of the reason why oil, by the way, is so important, it's not just because of the energy we get out of it, because oil is also an organic, thing. We make all kinds of things with, the candle wax and the tires and parts of your carpet, and just about everywhere we use these organic. So it's going to revolutionize industry. Right now we're doing 3D printing, right? So imagine 3D printing a whole kind of like organic products. Like, you're like, I want just hemp, you need this particular hemp fiber or whatever. You just print, you just go in there and you just blah, blah, blah. And in a vat somewhere, in a slurry of whatever, it just comes out, hemp fiber and or burger meat or cow or whatever, and it'll actually be 1-to-1 identical, same DNA, same protein structure of a ribeye steak or something like that.
Oh, God.
That is freaky, but these are the things that are actually going on that I think that people like this don't mention. And the next billionaire, well, many billionaires are going to be in that industry, but one of the biggest of them is going to be the person that first cracks that code and creates that particular. I mean, there are people out there doing it and investing in that right now,
Yeah,
and the
I've been
podcast you can
hearing.
listen to.
Yeah,
okay.
I think Israel has a couple of companies that are already on it, that making 3D printed meat.
Yeah,
It's
the 3D media already exists. Just a question of now, okay, you know how things typically go when it comes, because this is one of those engineering problems. And I think everybody understands engineering problems, right? Because we've all tried to do something before that we imagined, right? So you're like, I'm going to make this cake. That's an engineering problem. And we know that just because it's theoretically possible, or because you made it once, or you were able to make the actual batter, doesn't mean you've solved the whole problem and you can now mass produce the cakes. So in terms of our scientific understanding and the theoretical know-how, and maybe the AI level programming of how we would because Google has this Google did something. I forget the name of its particular because it has these things like AlphaGo, for example. We beat the game Go. It's an AI program, and it's Alpha X. I forgot what the X is, but it's the one that kind of cracked the particular thing with the genetic with protein sequencing, right? Basically, protein sequencing and protein folding. So in terms of like the AI has solved the problem, but we got to do the engineering problem. We got to actually make it work real time, solve all the kinks, do all that kind of stuff, actually produce this stuff. That is the thing that usually makes people billions. Typically, it's not the science, it's the engineering, right? It's well, now let's make it shit, right? That makes them billions. But Google already has the probably they're gonna patent that stuff. Google is gonna own all future proteins, it's including the ones in your eyeball.
Google Meet.
Google Meet. That's it. When you wake up in the morning, like you know how computers have like a startup screen.
Oh God.
When you wake up in the morning, it's like Google Meet.
That they already have. I mean, this year alone, drought and extreme heat has completely killed the soy and corn crop, and projections are far off. It's been a very bad year for.
Shout out to Bob. Shout out to Bob. Shout out to Bob. I almost forgot. No, I was not ignoring you there, but thank you for the $2. Next, AI will have human right. That's obviously coming, right? Because and this one is even more. It makes more sense given the way we think than animals, even, right? In other words, he's saying, hey, AI is going to have rights. I said earlier that animals will get rights, AI will get rights because we are pushing ourselves to become AI. It's not like we want to augment ourselves so bad. It's not even funny. And
it's freaky. Like everyone's on this app where they're, posting pictures of their AI self. I'm like, it sounds like a bit of a trap in some way. Like, these are the people that are going to want to be AI, whoever downloads this app.
Oh, gotcha. Exposing themselves that way. Generally though, in human nature, I mean, Joan, there you have glasses on, you have some kind of fabric on, you probably have all kinds of things that around you that might, phone, for example, right? Huge one. We know that's a huge one in terms of part of you, your car, all these things. So human beings have always been this type of animal that puts on a shell, removes it. Like if you're a Martian or something like that, you would see us as like, okay, put on a shell, we remove the shell, we pick up another shell. Like we're very much augmented, right? We like do all kinds of weird stuff to ourselves to augment ourselves internally and externally, right? So foregone conclusion, we're going into the machine. Like that's all we've been doing ever since the Stone Age. Ever since we started fire, we've been trying to merge with the damn thing. Okay. And it just makes sense. It's who we are, it's kind of what we do. So I think that by the time we start blurring the line between that AI and ourselves, it's all gonna be some kind of universal rights for all computing, thinking, whatever, autonomous vehicles.
Many farmers, and that's only going to continue because it's only going to be harder to farm. And on top of that, think about water a lot. Cows particularly consume a lot of water. There's at the same time already access issues with water. There's a lot of pollution in so many of the country's waterways. The Mississippi is receding. There's drought on more than half the country, and water is going to continue to be a key resource for livestock. I'm already hearing about ranchers in Arizona and New Mexico selling off their ranches because they don't have water anymore, and it's only going to get worse. So, there's so many different aspects of how climate change will attack the resources that big meat has relied on in the past several decades. And at the same time, there's also been, kind of an eating away at the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act through, in large part, to, industrial meat lobbyists and different interests in that industry. And they've been benefiting from those regulations being eroded over time. But it's now going to kind of completely come back to bite them.
So climate change is going to bite them. Then she should want climate change, right?
The importance of water. I mean, I live in California. I was at a meeting with agriculture producers recently, and this is the central issue that's talked about, is the lack of water, how it's going to impact the amount of acres that can be farmed, how it's going to impact overall the food supply. And so, water is a critical issue that is going to continue to be of importance to the society as a whole, as well as to the agriculture industry and the ability to produce food.
Absolutely.
So as we talk about the environment and the impact of the livestock industry, there are increasingly, and we saw a lot of them, have good sales during the pandemic, of alternatives for meat, in particularly the plant-based alternatives. These companies that are producing them have had, rapid increases in sales. Talk about these alternatives. What are they? Are they better for the planet? Are they better for the human? Are they more nutritious? Talk a little bit about this whole plant-based alternative market that has been developing over the past several years.
Thanks. Yeah, so this is one of those other areas that I thought my reporting and my access to different investors and just all the different balance sheets that I see could really kind of bridge some gaps with different communities talking about different problems, but not really coming to kind of coalesce. And so, I think while there is this frenzy around alternative proteins and plant-based foods, particularly in 2020, and they did see, a fair amount of significant growth, taking a step back, the volume that was actually selling was still less than 1% of the overall meat industry. So it really had never taken a large chunk or large bite out of the big meat industry, which I think is the most important part of that mission at the end of the day. It doesn't help anyone if consumption is increasing and plant-based foods are increasing alongside meat increasing. It really needs to be a one-for-one. And unfortunately, we're just not really seeing that yet. Sales have completely stagnated in 2021 and into this year. And this frenzied market that had billions and billions of dollars poured into it from investors, really kind of went bust and is starting to show the limitations of all these, too good to be true marketing stories and climate activists, unfortunately. And so, I wrote a lot about how really may not be even better for the earth on top of all of that. And it's certainly not better for us as humans. At the end of the day, these foods are still highly ultra processed.
What? Like, she's just gonna randomly say it may not. I don't like, again, like I mentioned before that when she does it could happen or it's possible. Sometimes she uses, last time she was using sometimes this and then, sometimes that. And for to just kind of say it may not even be better for the earth, like what part? Like in which lab, which particular process? Okay, so it's only 1% right now. It's growing, right? It's going to grow to become more and more of what people eat. Obviously, it's not going to be the first, second, or third company that completely cracks the code. So if the thing has not been completely formed yet and solved yet, how do you know it's bad? How do you know that the one that comes out that is correct is not using a particular process that has nothing to do with any of the ill effects you were talking about, such as the water and the feeding the cow? Because right now, and the reason why this thing is going to be so valuable, billions of dollars, is think about how much energy, and energy is money, it takes to just get that ribeye to you. The ribeye that I said can come from a lab, come from a vat, come from a slurry somewhere that somebody programmed. What's the alternative? You got to get this freaking cow from somewhere, right? And then you got to transport the damn thing, or it's right there in your ranch. You feed the thing, you water the thing. I don't even know the numbers. We could throw the numbers out. How many hundreds of gallons or thousands of gallons and such, blah, blah, blah. And then you kill the thing and all these workers, like just to get you that meat. Meanwhile, the alternative will be you have a factory, it's set, it's built, ready to go, and you push the button and the kind of protein chain that you want comes out. How much money that means, right? But she's throwing shade again. I don't understand. What do you think is behind? And you may not just use her, but there's this general attitude that you may have noticed. I think she represents a certain type of person that just doesn't want to see solutions that doesn't look like what she wants, because she just wants to poke the billionaires down and whatever else. And what's going on here?
I mean, she wants to promote drastic changes, like, we have to stop now. We have to stop how things are being done now and do something completely different, which is like not realistic. Like this happens with a lot of these like activist type. They want, like now, stop now. Like we got to change right now. And they are not really realistic about the process of getting to whatever the solution that they've imagined in their heads. And like, for her, it's like, she's like, I don't know, like, where does she stand? Like, I can't I can't figure it out. So is
Yeah,
she? It's like, is she against eating meat, or is she's okay with eating meat as long as it's like raised a certain way? But then at the same time, it's like, oh, we need to have more of these meat alternate. It needs to be 1-to-1. Like I don't really get what
He's like, oh, if meat consumption is going up along with the alternatives going up, that's not good. It needs to be for every new alternative meat unit you sell, right? You knock down one of the originals. Like he's got to keep, but both of them are rising and she's not satisfied. A teaching moment right now, just about general mindsets and stuff like that. We talked about her lack of marketing skills. She's not a marketer or a salesperson. So no shade. We're just kind of using her as an example. But another thing also is that thing called growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. She's a perfect example of a fixed mindset person. Now, not to just be, woo about it. I'm talking about the people that do crap in the world, build crap in the world, and as a result make money. Those billionaires that she's pointing the bad finger at. If a billionaire, which they do exist, that is on her position, in her position, because a lot of billionaires that want to stop climate change or whatever, right? The way they would look at what she recently presented regarding the alternatives is to say, look, 2020 showed some great promise, right? There was a lot of money poured into it, right? And as it turns out, partly because of some of the market, the issues in the market, the issues with the Fed, the monetary market, and certain other things, some of those investments did not quite pan out as it was promised, right? There was a little bit of hype and a little bit of marketing. Okay, we need to go through a couple more cycles, but as a matter of fact, and then they'll get granular. They'll be like, this particular company was able to solve X, Y, and Z as pertains to this particular process. This is the kink right now. And if we pass this, I think that we're going to be ready for mass consumption, right? That kind of a thing where it's like, they give you an insight into what exactly that particular fork in the road, that chink in the armor, that particular thing that needs to be solved in the industry right now. In addition to the fact, the financial stuff that was mentioned about, oh, people invested in it and it didn't kind of pan out. Well, that happens all the time. Plus, the market, the stock market is bloody right now. Crypto is bloody. Everyone's bloody right now. What are you talking about, right? So it's been a lot of, since 2020, it's been a lot of downward sloping of all kinds of investments. But the idea of, hey, I tell you about the investment. I tell you, okay, we're going to get out of it at some point. I say, this is where the industry is right now with regards to this particular technology. I point out exactly what the thing is. And I say, hey, the person who solves this is going to take us to the future. That's what a growth mindset is, as opposed to it may not even be good and blah, blah, whatever. Anyways,
There are lots of different ingredients that have been chemically mutated, farmed with sometimes even glyphosate or potentially allegedly cancerous chemicals or different
allegedly cancer
herbicides that have been used over decades and supporting, a monoculture where there's
it's like allegedly cancerous chemicals. It's like, like the chemicals gets held up like you've been alleged.
You're under arrest for being allegedly cancerous.
Gotta lock up these chemicals. They've been charged. They've been accused, allegedly.
Biodiversity completely kind of falling by the wayside. And on top of that, like those are the main ingredients, right? The corn, the soy. Then you have a lot of additives, different things to make it taste the way you want, or they think you want meat to taste. Lots of flavor science, fragrance, cellulose even added in, which is
flavor science. Ooh. It's not just food coloring and typical stuff that you've been doing in bakeries since the 1500s or whatever. It's flavor science. That's bad. Like, cellulose. They're adding and making it taste like you think they want you to.
Is a common laxative, and so there's a lot of things mixed.
Now they're putting laxative in it. Now you got cancer. You're puking.
That's a flavor. Okay. She didn't say flavor science. Okay.
Cellulose even added in, which is a common laxative, and so there's a lot of things mixed up in this mystery meat, this meatless mystery meat, and it's supporting at the end of the day the same commodified systems that meat is supporting.
She just has an issue with the market. It's kind of like commodified, like the idea that something is commodified. She wants things to grow naturally out of the ground in your parents' backyard when you frolic in the meadows and you eat bugs and everything just works out that way. You come home to a nice home cooked meal of beans and really, really small bananas because they're not GMO, they were not, and all that kind of stuff. And you guys have to no bug spray. You got to get the natural malaria, and some kids have to die, some kids have to die.
Yeah, I wonder if she would live on a ranch. I wonder if she would be the type to like grow her own food. I'd be curious.
I doubt it. No, I think she's more of she's definitely
the complainer
person. What did you say?
She's just a complainer. I mean, I know she eats meat. Yeah. I saw her Instagram. I looked her up earlier.
Oh crap! Damn you! Wow, Joan, you out there researching her, finding out that she eats meat. Well, that's not. Well, anyway, she's a journalist. She's just out here reporting. But this kind of idea of everything has to go back to some kind of capitalist system that is the problem. Like, this new mystery meat is not only is it so bad, but it's kind of supporting the same commodified system that the other system is. Like, okay.
And it's supporting at the end of the day the same commodified systems that meat is supporting. It's supporting the same plants infrastructure often that meat is supporting. And again, I really want to be clear, it would have a chance of really impacting climate and taking, decarbonizing. If it were to take a significant bite out of meat volume, it would have to be around at least 15%. It's barely there right now. So there's the chance, but there are just a lot of investors pumping a lot of money into something they saw as a easy hack to a climate change solution that could probably get acquired for a lot of money. And what's now ended up happening is a lot of those investors are writing off their investments, giving up and tossing these ideas aside. And aside from, what the actual ideas are about, I think one of the worst parts of writing this book for me was just seeing that time really is running out. And we just really don't have the time and energy to waste on false solutions or.
So she's still on the time thing, and that's why she can't wait for the mystery meat to get done in the next 5 years. She wants to come for you.
Decarbonize.
She wants to come for your meat right now. It's got to stop right now. And she talked about the commodity and also the same plants, the same infrastructure, in other words. And that's another way of saying it's going to enrich the same people. So we could solve all the problems. We could come in with a nice, clean protein meat, out of a vat somewhere in a factory that solves her decarbonization concerns. But if it's still serving the same billionaire guy, then it's not good because it's about a whole. And the thing is, if I were to steel man that argument, if she's making that argument, it's based on the notion, right, that I think is rather a utopian. It's a utopian notion that it must again go back to that meadows, decentralized, local farming, locally sourced and sustainable type model. That if anything is done in a centralized location somewhere in some kind of a plant where therefore the value is going to accrue to a centralized point and form billionaires, right? Then that system is necessarily corrupt. And that system will continue to lead us to bad places. It is, after all, that system that has brought us to the place where we are right now in terms of climate control or climate change. But they fail to see that it is the same system that will take you out of climate change. And it's the same system that has taken billions of people out of poverty and fed them, right? The same kind of capitalist system, same kind of system whereby people figure things out and then they win the lottery in a certain way. And also, it's also utopian in the sense that because you can dream of the meadows and that that's great for you aesthetically, but you have to imagine what kind of a system sustains the meadows. And every time we try it, or anytime even you imagine it, okay, so how do we stay all happy in this, anytime you try to imagine it, it ends up in some kind of communistic hellhole, right? Or you quickly just realize that, oh no, we're just going to start trading again, and people are going to be better than others. The hierarchy is going to form again, and you're going to just start with billionaires again.
Right.
So, and this is not me just being some kind of I'm not just being uncritical or blind about capitalism. I'm talking about systems thinking versus outcome thinking. The outcome thinking is like the utopia. I want the meadows. That's the outcome. I want the meadows. The system thinker says, okay, what systems create the meadows? You can't just dream something up. There's got to be a system that is working it. And what is the best system to create the best human outcomes? And the system is never a utopia.
No. I mean, you think about like a lot of these people that go off the grid and try to like live off the land, like maybe they don't know how to do that shit, you know? And they need some kind of system. They need a team of people. They need like a company or something. Yeah, they need the hierarchy to like be like, you know, hey, it's your job to do this, your job to do that. And yeah, it's just the way things work. Like, I mean, yeah, it'd be ideal that everybody can raise their own cows and grow all their own food by themselves, you know, within like a family, you know, or just a small community or whatever. But it's not, I mean, we just don't live that way these days, especially with like this, you know, convenience culture that we're in. Everything has to be, you know, ready to go. And yeah, I just have a hard time believing that people at this point, with the way we live with like technology and convenience, that we could somehow rewind and become our own like farmers and ranchers that raise our own food. It's just not realistic at this point.
Mm-hmm.
The wrong ideas, or ideas that really investors are just trying to make a quick amount of money off of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you do talk about, in addition to, you know, the kinds of alternatives that, you know, are made from the corn and soy and may not really be that healthy for the person eating it, that mushrooms may be a better alternative. And then there is the other
mushrooms are great,
which is,
I like mushrooms. Wait, what kind of mushrooms then?
Yeah, all of them are great.
About to come to market, is actually in the market, I think, in Singapore, and that's cell-based or lab-based meat, I think, as you called it. Talk about what it is. Is it going to work? The technology shows promise, but it will take some time to reach the grocery stores.
Yeah, so as I said, you know, meat production, meat consumption overall needs to go down. And while I do think there always will be a place for better meat, good meat, more sustainably, nutritiously produced.
This is the problem. Why does it need to go down? If the factory meat, the lab meat comes out, and we all still eat 100%, like we be like, hey, we're eating 100% meat, okay? What's wrong with that? Again, the Meadows image in these people, they can't let it go. It's like, no, it has to go down. We have to also eat all these other things and these other things. The intuition I 100% get, which is the intuition of diversification, localization, because diversification, localization, all those things mean the same thing, because it's centralized is one model, right? All there. And then you diversify and localize is the other model. There's a sense in which diversified and localized things also are more robust, in the sense that you have a centralized model, all you got to do is cut off one head and boom, the supply or whatever it is, or the system is dead. But if you're decentralized, you're like a multi-headed hydra. I cut off one head, you know, you still got production over here, blah, 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 that kind of a thing. The general impulse towards that kind of decentralization, there's nothing wrong with the concept, right? But it's not just to be emotionally adhered to. Like, you just say things such as meat has to go down, even though you know that there are alternatives where you can solve your problems and people could still eat all the meat they want if it came out of a lab and such like that. So probably like she was a rich kid. She kind of grew up. She went to Princeton or something like that. Came out, now she writes for Forbes.
Yeah.
So, you know, she has to do something with her life. You know,
Right.
There's somebody that said something, and I thought about it deeply. It's like, look, life is easy for the person who makes the money. Let's say in the family. Let's say it's her dad or her granddad that made the money. That life is actually easy for them. That life is infinitely harder for, in this case, someone like her. She's a stand-in. She may not actually be this person, right? But for someone whom actually inherits the money, and then it's like, what do I have to do? Right? That life is harder. What do you think about that statement? what does your intuition tell you about why that might even be true, or is it all hogwash? What are your thoughts?
So
Life
you're
is
saying that life is
easy if you're.
easier
It's easy for the person who went out there,
to
made the
make the money,
billions,
right?
hustled. He was a grandpa, was an immigrant, and then he built an industry. That guy's life is easy. But the kids who now have everything and I got to figure it out what
Yeah.
they're gonna do, that their life is harder. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, of course their life is harder. I mean, on the surface it seems easy because they never really had to work for anything, but they're like the most lost souls out there. I mean, I've known or met I think she's like one of like the rich, like she comes from one of the richest families in Europe. Like her dad like works in like some kind of journalism company in Germany, and like she came out here for school, like music school, and like like I've met her, hung out with her, and it's just like, what are you doing with your life? And you have all this money and you don't have to worry about, like, she pays like a full year of rent for her apartment. Like she'll pay it up front, like, yeah, it seems easy. But then like you look at like what she's trying, like she's one of those, like becomes an activist, so I'm so wealthy that I need to do something with my money, my wealth. And it's like, she tries to like throw it out in like different kinds of causes and stuff. Whereas like she doesn't really look within what's in her surroundings, what's around her with herself to try to fix, her problems of being lost and, I don't know, like within her community even. And I think it's just hard for them because now they feel like, okay, well, I just have all this money. I don't have to worry. Like, what's my purpose then? And I think a lot of people have a hard time living their life if they don't know what their purpose is. Whereas like their grandfather who made all the money, worked hard, started from nothing, built something, like they had a purpose, to build this generational wealth.
Yeah, and it was easy. And I almost want to kind of reemphasize that, in other words, that purpose was given to them. In other words, the grandfather, right? When you're broke and you're trying to get out of it, there's a direction, because the first thing you mentioned is that these other people are lost, right? Because this is all about directionality, right? Running away from the poorhouse, there's a very clear direction. Anywhere, but the poorhouse, right? It's just like run away from the poorhouse, and there's motivation. There's the fear pushes you, greed pushes you, like this, all kinds of push and pull, helping you along in this kind of purpose, in a purpose-driven life of a sort. So yeah, I mean, then it takes a lot of hard work to then pull it off. So grandpa did work, but grandpa didn't have to work on the purpose, right? He just kind of moved. But anyways, let's play a little bit more of this. She has enlightened us on a few things, okay, ladies and gentlemen. And there was a poll here, okay, and you guys kind of gave your thoughts as to what you think about the situation as well. Now, most of you, I think most people said that basically living conditions should be changed, and some people say that meat consumption should go down as well. Her general argument has to do with, number one, you have billionaires, centralized power, profiteering, and all these kinds of things. That's not good. It works against the favor of a more decentralized model with mom and pop, locally sourced, sustainable. You know the idea, right? Farmers market, we all know the alternative. The other thing she's talking about is, she mentioned very emphatically bad working conditions and exposure to diseases, abuse, and special racism or whatever that happens only in Meat Park. I don't know what, they have the special KKK in there or something like that. And looming behind the whole time is the idea of climate change, even though she did not make the case that the way in which the food is produced is causing the climate change. But she did say that the climate change is going to affect the fiefdoms of these particular billionaires and what they have built, right? And she's not a fan of the new food being raised in labs because it's still going to go towards a decentralized model. And then she threw shade at it, just like, oh man, it's bad anyways, and it's sour grapes, and yeah, it's not good for your liver, and there's foods flavor science.
Flavor science. Put some cellulose in that flavor.
Put some cellulose in there. It's just, and laxatives.
Laxative.
Meat to exist. I think by and large, the protein landscape is going to significantly change. And mushrooms are a huge one for me. I was growing mushrooms in my apartment in the pandemic, which was an incredible experience. But there's also a lot of this mycelium tech and startups out there, these kind of like third generation alternative protein startups that are all trying to commercialize.
And you know, got excited there about talking about growing mushrooms in her, but it kind of gives an insight into that whole person. Wait, let's see.
Yeah. So as I said, meat production, meat consumption overall needs to go down. And while I do think there always will be a place for better meat, good meat, more sustainably, nutritiously produced meat to exist, I think by and large, the protein landscape is going to significantly change. And mushrooms are a huge one for me. I was growing mushrooms in my apartment in the pandemic, which was...
You see how much she's smiling in terms of...
She's so proud of herself.
Yeah, it's that whole kind of like, oh, my purpose, I was growing. And it's like, it's not solving anything. And it's nothing new, by the way.
No, she lives in an apartment, like she's not living on a ranch.
Well,
huge one for me. I was growing mushrooms in my apartment in the pandemic, which was an incredible experience. But there's also a lot of this mycelium tech and startups out there, these kind of like third generation alternative protein startups that are all trying to commercialize the root systems of mushrooms that essentially can be like sliced off and cut into a bacon or a chicken cutlet and actually have a very meaty taste. And so I talk about some of the startups that have been working on this for 4 decades. I go to one of the founders' homes in upstate New York where he's living off the grid and has all this crazy stuff. And
you see, this is her solution. This is her world. Bullshit. I mean, she's been kind of like in emotional strings puller the whole time. She didn't build a solid edifice of rational or solid rationale.
No.
So we had to kind of build it for her and kind of steel man her positions and everything. But she's kind of been emotional the whole time. And now her spirits go up because when they were talking about like the new meat science, she didn't get excited. She just started throwing shade at it. It's not good. Who knows? Cellulose, all that stuff we just said. And her stuff is off the grid and crazy stuff. And it's like, what you can't base policies on this kind of crazy, I got a rich dad, now I got to find meaning in my life bullshit. Oh, well.
Yeah, that's what they do.
It's giving him energy. And, I think there's still a lot of questions around the energy use behind these plants and any production. And a lot of these, like the mycelium startups, but also the lab-grown startups, which we'll talk about next, they all, kind of rely on the energy grid really becoming electrified. Who's to say that's actually going to happen? Would love it to, but until then, there are kind of significant research questions. These aren't completely carbon negative foods, but mushrooms provide a way better outlook, and they're very easy to be used as like a whole food. They need less processing, which is exciting. Now, then you also have on the other side of things, you have the lab grown meat, cultivated meat. Some folks, especially in the business, are calling it, and started selling in Singapore. Josh Testrick behind Eat Just is one of the bigger pioneers here in the US. Uma Valetti of Upside Foods is as well, just opened a big plant in California. And cultivated meat is about to hit our market. Whether folks like it or not, the FDA has been working for a really long time on what these regulations will look like.
So it's not here yet, huh?
With a lot of these startups and their advisors, and it's about to happen. And I think you're going to hit the culture wars. I think there's some long-term questions around energy.
Okay, cool. Let's start landing the plane here. Look, in terms of disruption, and this is I think that the overall, if one want to think about it in some kind of stupid way, which I'm about to say, I think that we kind of, when you invent the wheel and you get into the Stone Age, what you're doing is what you typically call mechanical engineering. That's kind of how we started in this whole technology thing. We do practice mechanical engineering, got to rocketry, did all kinds of fun stuff with it. And then you get into electrical engineering, kind of did that too, kind of been pretty good at that. We did chemical too, right? And not so bad at that in terms of our ability to manipulate materials and create new materials and all these kinds of things. Biochemical is the new frontier now. And again, we're talking about growing proteins, syncing up and folding chains of amino acids and creating these proteins. And proteins, by the way, in terms of, we mentioned those 4 groups of organic compounds, right? Which is proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and nucleic acids. proteins are like little machines. They're like little mechanical things, right? So they're like proteins are like the Lego set of the thing, right? Carbohydrates, we generally know what those are, and they store energy, generally speaking. Same thing with fats, right? Proteins are actually like this Lego set stuff. They do the work, right? In a cell, for example, the protein is doing the work. So the muscles and the shape of things and stuff like that is about the way the proteins are arranged. And it is complex again, carbon compounds, organic compounds that we cannot make. Only life makes these life compounds. And this is the last frontier in terms of biochemistry. Is the last frontier. Many billions to be made. I think in this meat front is going to be a big aspect of it. But as I mentioned, fabrics, all kinds of things can now be 3D printed. I'm giving it like another 20 years or something like that. And this is where the solutions will be. But I don't know. What do you think about? Are you a fan of a book? You're going to buy her book? You're going to read Raw Deal by our friend Chloe, or she didn't quite impress you?
No. Because I mean, I'm open to like reading something that just, might actually have a solution, but I don't know. I mean, like her ranting like that, just I didn't really hear any solutions. I didn't hear any like policy changes that could, be implemented. I didn't really hear about like, well, how's meat causing climate change, and then in return climate change is going to affect the meat. She's like decarbonizing and all that stuff, and it's like, okay, you didn't really tell me anything new, or like anything like wow, like, oh my god, I didn't know like that was happening. I just I was not impressed. But it was really, I mean, like when I was watching that documentary about like ranchers and stuff, and it's like, like people complain like, oh yeah, like cows are just causing all kinds of greenhouse gases. Like they've been doing that shit like for a long time. Like that's just part of nature. Like they take a shit and then the shit goes in the ground, makes the soil good, and then they move on, and you guys can grow plants now and there. It's like, I don't know, it's just part of it.
Well, yeah. First world problems, and if you want, it's kind of interesting because remember I mentioned that along with getting animal rights, that the general progression of history tends to be in the progressive direction. What people who any particular point in time, the people who call themselves progressives are arguing for something, right? And that they always win in the long run, right? It's if anyone is a conservative, right, or has conservative tendencies, which I do, which is a philosophical thing, which, most people are not sophisticated enough to get into either philosophy and then political philosophy and then politics. They just immediately think it's politics all the time. But a conservative tendency politically from a philosophical point of view still ought to understand that progressives always win in the long run. That the world gets more and more egalitarian in certain ways, tolerant in certain ways, or whatever it is in certain ways that the progressives of the past have been pushing, right? So, and it depends though on continued economic stability. Okay, if you stay fat and fed, okay, then in the future we will have a bill of rights or charter or some kind of a thing for animals. The only downside to that is, how long can we actually stay fat and happy and have first world problems without being completely intolerable, right? Like just turning into something complete. Like it's not even worth. Like why are we even? The humanity is no longer worth keeping alive because we've become such bitches, right? It will be the notion here. But I think that sustained economic development and all that kind of stuff with the progressive kind of attitudes. I mentioned neurochemistry and all the things and neuroscience in terms of how we learn about the animals' brains. We're going to be mapping animals' brains. And oh my God, soon the vegans will come for you last when you're going to find out that lettuce screams violently when you bite into it, right? We're going to find that out too. And then you guys will not have any excuses anymore. And we have to now be strapped into a chair, fed by osmosis from the sun or something like that. That'll be our final stage. If, that's the best case scenario because that's economic progression and everything. The other way is, we get knocked down a few pegs and then have to start again. Back to grandpa. Grandpa has direction. He's going for stuff. He's blah, blah, blah. Anyways, I'll give you the last word. Wow.
I don't know what to say.
What are you?
My last words.
It's the proverbial
that-
last word. Yeah.
Yes, lettuce does scream when you bite into it.
Lettuce does scream when you bite into it, and such is life. You know, you can't
Such is
avoid
life.
violence. You cannot avoid the give and take. Life is accretion, domination, and killing and such. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, okay, that was a good one. We reviewed a book on the show. We always review some piece of popular culture content like that. And we're still not convinced. Maybe we'll come back next time with the other view of like the things that are going on that are exciting in terms of the meat manufacturing, right? Something more positive, something like that. And then we'll see, would you eat that? How about this? That kind of a thing. But we gave her a chance. Apparently, Joan said she failed. So that's it. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen,
All right.
shout out. We're gone.
In the den of iniquity, vicinity no pretty, calamity fi hit we any moment, what a pity. Tomorrow never certain, what was behind the curtain, the face of evil smirking with that shifty eyes averting. It's not a steady bubble, that either pop or topple, many will fall and stumble, let the dozers gather rubble. From LA to Colorado, Guinea to Burkina Faso, cannons could breach the towers and the troops will storm the castle. Hey, I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. With the rubble steady rising, and hearts are compromising. Convictions here are stifling, making evil appetizing. The fists are steady forming, and countenance is falling. Defenses are withdrawing, possibilities are falling. In these your circumstances, evil will make advances. Pick up your sword and lances, and be sure to take your stances. Victory is never promised, the battle is upon us. Gather the brave and honest, and the righteous in your corners.